The core religious allegory of Islam starts with Muhammad's revelation in the caves and ends with the death of the fourth successor, Ali, almost 40 years later. It is analogous to the Last Supper, the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus Christ in Christianity. In the lifetime of Muhammad, his community gained the control over the Arabian Peninsula, and though he passed away in 632 AD, the religious story doesn't end there, but it is continued through his four closest followers, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. Together, they formed the Rashidun, which means the rightly guided ones. And together, they established the first Islamic state, the Caliphate. In just 30 years, the Rashidun Caliphate had conquered all of Persia, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Levant, and even parts of the Byzantine Empire in Anatolia. In some ways, this new state resembled a democracy. The leaders were all elected by a council of representatives. But the transition of power between these leaders was not an easy one. The 30 years of human drama was first documented by the Arab historian Ibn Ishaq, but most of his work has been lost. However, before it disappeared, other scholars and historians quoted from it and summarized from it. The thing is, Islam emerged in literate times. Historians were writing journals, scholars were writing diaries and letters, jurists were writing bureaucratic articles. So from the 7th century onwards, there was a rich record of documents, and that's why we know so many historical details. One historian who used Ibn Ishaq as his major source was the 9th century Persian scholar Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari. He collected many of these records and compiled a chronicle called the History of Prophets and Kings. It was a 39-volume chronology from biblical figures to ancient empires all the way to 915 AD. The historian dedicated an entire volume to a period of just 30 years of human drama, and it all started with the death of a prophet. Welcome to Caspian Report by me, Shirvan. The moment the prophet passed away, the Muslim community, also called the Ummah, faced a crisis. The question rose, who was our next leader and what was our next leader? The Ummah had simply not given this subject any consideration before the death of Muhammad, but they had to come up with something new. The argument was that the new leader could not be a saint because Muhammad had specifically said that he was the last messenger of God. But equally important, the next leader could not just be another king, because the Ummah was not just another country, rather the Muslim community viewed themselves as the embodiment of Islam. In the hours following the death of Muhammad, the 60-year-old Abu Bakr, a close companion of the Prophet, heard rumors that the Muslims from Medina were meeting to elect a leader of their own. Abu Bakr gathered some of the other companions and crashed the meeting. He begged the Muslims from Medina to reconsider and to elect a single leader for all Muslims. During his speech, Abu Bakr pleaded not for a prophet nor for a king, but just for one person to call meetings, just for one person to moderate discussions, and he pointed to two companions of the Prophet, saying, choose one of these two. One of the appointed companions was Umar. But in Bedouin Arab culture, it is considered unthinkable to take precedence over an elderly man. Umar came forth with tears in his eyes and argued for Abu Bakr as the new leader. The decision was unanimous. Abu Bakr was voted as the first deputy of Muslims, better known as the first Caliph. Nobody really knew what the title meant or what powers it held, so the first title holder would have to fill in those details. For now, Abu Bakr's succession was announced and everyone agreed and cheered, but not everyone was there. One leading candidate did not even hear the issue was being discussed. Muhammad's cousin, Ali, was still washing the body of the deceased prophet when he heard that a new leader was elected. You can see how this might have sounded because Ali thought that he was Muhammad's successor because he was the closest to the prophet, and there were numerous reasons why. Ali's father had actually adopted Muhammad as a son, which essentially made Muhammad and Ali brothers. But Muhammad was some 30 years older than Ali, and in tribal Arab culture, a much older brother had parental status with his siblings. Furthermore, Ali grew up in the household of Muhammad. This meant that Ali was basically like a son of Muhammad, at least from the Shia point of view. Equally important is the fact that Ali was the first male to accept Islam. He was the one who risked taking a knife when assassins were coming for Muhammad. He was there side by side with Muhammad in every battle. As Islam spread throughout the peninsula and the Muslim community grew, Muhammad kept Ali close at his side as his right-hand man. In fact, on the way home from his last sermon, the Prophet held a speech before a crowd of 70,000 to 120,000 people at a place called Al-Khadir Kum, in which he said the following: "Any of you who consider me your patron should consider Ali your patron." Supporters of Shia Islam interpret these words as Muhammad appointing Ali as his heir and successor. Sunni Muslims, however, interpret the words as Muhammad urging a large audience to hold his cousin and son-in-law in high esteem and affection. But perhaps the most important factor why Ali was considered the heir and successor to the Prophet was that Muhammad had no sons. The only grandsons he had was from his daughter Fatima, who was married to Ali. So many consider Ali's sons as Muhammad's grandsons. But from a Sunni perspective, dynastic succession was not Islamic, and Ali's family ties to the Prophet were exactly the kind of things they had to prevent from becoming an aristocracy. And so when the Prophet passed away, Ali was completely neglected. He was not considered a candidate, and he was not even consulted. There are two main explanations for what happened next. According to some sources, it took Ali roughly 6 months to concede the election. In those months, the supporters of Abu Bakr threatened the family of Ali, and in one incident resulted in the miscarriage of Fatima. Other sources claim that it took Ali a few days to swear allegiance to Abu Bakr, and that the miscarriage of Fatima was an accident. A dispute like this can never be solved now, but it does show that the disagreements between Abu Bakr and Ali eventually transformed into two different sects of Islam, the Sunnis and the Shias. In either case, whether it's 6 months or 6 days, Ali had conceded the election. What followed shortly afterwards was that all over Arabia, the tribes and clans were seceding from their allegiance to Abu Bakr and the capital Medina. The tribal leaders argued that they had never pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr or the Ummah, but only to Muhammad himself, and with the death of the Prophet, the allegiance was now void. But perhaps the real underlying reason was the zakat, or the charity tax that the tribes paid to the treasury of Medina. A few tribal leaders even proclaimed themselves as the new prophets. Abu Bakr responded by establishing a new religious doctrine. The idea was that if there is only one God, then there must be only one embodiment of Islam, one community, one ummah. Secession and apostasy was declared to be treason. At the time, it seemed like a logical, short-term solution. But over the centuries, this declaration would gradually change Islam to a social political system and not just a religious belief. Within a year, the secessionist rebellion was crushed by Khalid ibn al-Walid, the primary commander and military advisor of Abu Bakr. The Caliph had regained control over Arabia and ended the first Islamic civil war, also known as the Rida Wars. What happened next was that a series of provocations by the neighboring Sassanids and the Byzantines resulted in an all-out war between the Rashidun Caliphate, Sassanid Empire, and the Roman Empire, which we will refer to as the Byzantine Empire. The Sassanids were trying to stir up rebellion in the North Arabian regions, whilst the Byzantines moved their troops to the border of the Caliphate with the intent to conquer the fragmented Arabian region. From a strategic point of view, an invasion by either the Byzantine or the Sassanid Empire was inevitable in the long term. So Caliph Abu Bakr decided to strike first. What you have to understand here is that at the time, the Arabian Peninsula was made up of numerous autonomous tribes. The Arabs were doing a lot of trading. Spices, cloth, and other goods were transported from east to west, from north to south. So the Arabs were familiar with the major trading routes and the major religions of the time. But they also understood the logistics and military tactics of their two larger neighbors. And equally important, the Caliph understood that the Sassanids and the Byzantines were exhausted from centuries-long warfare. And so Abu Bakr and his closest advisors and military commanders worked on a strategic campaign that within a few decades would lead to one of the largest empires in history. Then, one August day in the year 634, Abu Bakr, after taking a hot bath, stepped outside his house into a blast of cold wind. By nightfall, he was running a high fever, and he knew that death was near. So he called the community's top notables and nominated Umar as his successor. Now Umar was also a close companion of Muhammad, but he was also a fierce military commander whose appearance, height, and temper intimidated the people around him. So the council wasn't convinced that Umar was the right man to lead the Ummah. A discussion unfolded, and at that critical moment, Ali stepped forward and endorsed Umar. His words tipped the scales. The Ummah had elected their second Caliph, and as soon as Umar took office, he turned towards the military campaign that he and Abu Bakr had worked on earlier. The succession crisis was over. Now it was time for war and conquest. This was a Caspian report by me, Shirwan. For more information, please visit the social media pages. And if you want to support Caspian Report, please visit the Patreon site. In the next Caspian Report, we will talk about the rise of the Caliphate and the internal politics that have so greatly influenced the principles of modern Islam. So for now, thank you for watching, take care, and Sawal.